Welcome to the Hoover Virtual Policy Briefing Series. I'm Tom Gilligan, Director of the Hoover Institution. For more than a century, the Hoover Institution and world-renowned library and archives have been collecting knowledge and generating ideas that support the pursuit of freedom and endeavor to improve the human condition. We've been able to occupy an eminent place in the think tank landscape by maintaining a focus on scholarly and empirical research that asks bold questions, offers powerful solutions for policymakers, and advances ideas to improve people's lives. These briefings are just one of the many ways we're able to reach out and share some of the important work coming out of the institution. Thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, we will be taking audience questions, and I encourage you to submit yours using the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. Today's discussion is with Shelby Steele on race in America. Shelby is the Robert J. and Marion E. Oster Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution. He has been writing and talking about race in America for decades. Shelby was awarded the Bradley Prize and the National Humanities Medal. He is the author of a book entitled Shame: How America's Past Sins Have Polarized Our Country. His work on the documentary 7 Days in Bensonhurst was recognized by an Emmy Award, and he is finishing a documentary called What Killed Michael Brown. Shelby, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Shelby, there are a number of issues I want to ask you about, but can you start by helping us to put the current civil unrest in perspective? I know that you and I, throughout our lifetimes, have witnessed racial tensions around the Civil Rights Act, around the Anti-War Act, etc. How are the current protests different and similar than the past? How can we put them in a historical perspective?
Well, I think they're, I was very much involved. I come from a civil rights family, and so I grew up sort of in that movement. And several things strike me about the difference then and now. One of which is, I think, if I could put it in one theme, it is that the protests today seem to me to be in their heart a kind of mimicry of past protests. They don't have issues with the kind of gravity that we had back in the 50s and the 60s when we were building up momentum toward the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 and so forth, when the Vietnam War expanded and the youth rebelled and there was a women's movement, and there were profound social movements so the protest was always attached to historical change, to self-examination. These today seem to me to have no such connection. They don't do a very good job of saying what they really want even. They sort of are quick to go to violence. We were not so quick back in those days, but today they are quick to go to violence, but again, don't do a very good job of explicating for society what it is that they really want, what sort of social changes they really want, what would they look like. They don't convince us of anything. Mm-hmm. Because I think, again, they're more about adolescent rebellion than they are about American society. That's one thing that strikes me as difference. The focus on race is another. Again, I grew up in the civil rights movement, and Martin Luther King and James Farmer, and actually knew some of these people, and they were assiduous, nonviolent, Gandhi-esque sort of figures. Their protest was about a moral witness. And they wore suits and ties. The ladies dressed for church. They marched with dignity. There was no, again, if you were any hint of even being rude, that you were kicked out of the march. Their dignity was the framework. You let them drag you out, but you yourself never submitted. You it constituted, again, a moral witness that was moving and finally was profoundly effective, changed the way America thinks about race. Again, the movements today seem to have none of that. America has changed. We're not the racist, segregated society we were back then. Minority students have every kind of opportunity to flourish in American life. And so they're, in a sense, you almost feel sorry for them. They want a cause, but they can't really find one.
Shelby, I mean, there seems to be a lot of tension and divide, though, out there in the world, both politically and on the streets. Help us better understand the issue or the issues that divide our country now along racial, ethnic, gender lines, identity lines, etc.
Well, I think, there are always the old standbys. Race is always probably the biggest, the deepest one that we divide up over. There is, I think, a symbiotic black-white connection. We both sort of need each other. Whites need blacks in order, they think, or certainly liberalism, white liberalism needs blacks in order to have groups to redeem, to lift up, and thereby establish their innocence of racism. For white liberals, the passion is to achieve innocence, to be beyond that charge of racism and evil. And so I think they, in a sense, I know they exploit, they use blacks, and by keep seeing them as victims. Blacks, on the other hand, have come to learn the only way they can really get attention from American society is by being victims. And so victimization is the center of the black identity today. And if you don't concede that you're a victim, you're not a real black, you're an Uncle Tom. Everything is victimization. University, here you have often well-to-do blacks, private school backgrounds, going to college and suddenly becoming enamored of the far or left ideology of almost Marxist in many cases, to try to find that authenticity that comes from protest. And so the protest probably in that sense is more important as a means for distinguishing, for carrying off an adolescent rebellion than about anything going on in society. When you ask today what causes, they'll come up belatedly after the violence has already occurred. They come, well, what we really want is to defund the police. Mm-hmm. Well, that answer to me, you're just dignifying the fact that you don't even know what you want. Mm-hmm. You just pull that out of the hat, and we're all supposed to debate that now and have a crime bill and push the police back and so forth. Well, why? What's the real problem? There isn't one.
Shelby, Lucy asked the following question. Do you think if there were an MLK type leader that the current protests would be more like the 60s?
I think that there was in the 60s, there was a perfect match between the cause and the leader. The cause was a great historical cause going back hundreds of years to slavery, segregation, Jim Crow South, all finally in the 50s, 60s, culminating in this profound moral, it was a human moral statement that we want to move beyond race and identity as a means to power. We want to be God's children again in that sense. Well, it was a great movement. The people who carried it off, again, I still look at them with great reverence. They met that moral challenge, and they did it again with silent witness. So that I saw men protesters in those days. I remember my own father integrating a church, a park in close to downtown Chicago, and they had their signs, and they stood there in moral witness. They were going to just simply have a family picnic, and a white man came up and hit him in the jaw. He didn't move. He looked the man in the eye. Excuse me. Didn't think I'd remember it that vividly. But the man gave up. Said he was apologized. Was mortified really at what he had done. Well, I don't think the protesters today, I don't think they can do that. I don't think the whites want to run up and hit blacks. I don't think blacks need to make that kind of moral witness today. It's a different ball game. The tragedy is that the youth of today are pretending that they're still that every white person out there is like this guy who hit my father. They're pretending that, because then they've got a noble war to engage that brings out their character and lets them know themselves and so forth. They're looking for a challenge. They're not going to find it. The society is not a perfect society, but I can tell you it's a different one and a lot better one than when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And so this generation is going to have to find authentic problems. There are plenty of them. Black community is riddled with them.
Yeah. Shelby, let me ask you that question. What do you think are the most significant challenges that African Americans face right now?
I think overwhelmingly, I mean, there's no comparison. The number one challenge is the absolute collapse of the black family, period. You just have generations now of children born with no family structure, with no father. And you say what you want. We are now absolute proof of the importance of fathers in the home. You need a mother and you need a father, and when you don't have those things, it's difficult to compensate, and it puts you automatically, it handicaps you in the human competition of American life. You almost have no right to do that to somebody to bring children into the world when you're not yet able to raise them in the right way. Well, there's no magic, no tricks involved in that. There's nothing special, no great insights one needs to have. It's the ordinariness of life that we need to get in touch with. Again, it doesn't have the glamour of standing with Martin Luther King, but it has more meaning, really. This is where you build character. This is where the race dignifies itself. My favorite quote is from Ralph Ellison that the race, what is it? The race is the gift of its individuals. Individuals take responsibility for becoming decent people, law-abiding, hardworking, so forth. You do it, I do it, the next person does it, and you look up one day and the race is great. The race is infallible. The race is strong. We don't do that. Without the family, you can't do that. So that if we as Black Americans do not address this problem, there's no hope.
Let's see. If you're just joining us, I'm Tom Gilligan, and this is the Hoover Institution's virtual policy briefing with Shelby Steele. Shelby, the leaders of the current protests have proposed several specific solutions to address problems that they see in race relations in America. The first is talking about police reform and kind of an extreme form of that, which is defunding the police. What is your reaction to ideas of defunding police departments?
Again, I think it's a diversion from the real problems that blacks face, which is not police. Most blacks in most communities want more police, more policing. Those neighborhoods have higher crime rates, so forth and so on. Everybody knows that. And so the idea that every black who's incarcerated is a victim of some systemic racism is ridiculous. We're at a point, when you get to the point where you can't call crime crime, then really all is lost. No, we need strong, well-trained, well-disciplined, professional policemen. We need them probably more than any other community in America needs them. We ought to be protesting for more of them, so that the hardworking, decent people in those communities can get up in the morning and go to work and come home in safety. Mm-hmm. And can raise their children in safety. Mm-hmm. Without them, like in Chicago this past weekend, how many children are shot dead? Mm-hmm. And you're going to tell me the problem is policing? Yeah. Well, this is what happens because of this, again, this symbiotic connection, blacks and whites. We make you feel guilty. You give us, you dole out few little peanuts to us, and we just keep going back and forth, and we think that's real meaningful race relations. Yeah.
Steve, Shelby, let me push back on that. Steve asked the following question, and I'll ask you to dig into this policing issue a little bit more. He says, I see unequal policing and police brutality as major themes in the most recent protest. Isn't there any validity to those complaints? If so, do you see a better means for addressing it?
Not quite sure what he means by it, but
probably unequal policing or police brutality.
Yeah. Okay. That issue did not even come up until the protest had gone on for 2 or 3 days, before violence had broken out everywhere. Then all of a sudden, as if to sort of cover their bases, they say, well, what issue can we put out here to legitimize ourselves? Mm-hmm. And they come up with the whole thing of policing. The reality is that police are, again, working on this documentary on Michael Brown. Spent a lot of time with police. They're some of the most decent people I've ever met. On the other hand, there's no doubt whatsoever that there are bad apples. They're bad policemen. I hate to say it because it's such a cliche. There are. And police departments need to do a better job of combing out those people. Really, that because they can now see as policemen the kind of difficulty that does to their reputation. So I'm happy to see us have better policing in the United States of America. But I can tell you that's 1,000 miles away from what we really need. The problems that we really have, and the low education levels, the breakdown of the family. These problems that can't be solved with a little piece of legislation. The problems we have are much more profound than that, and we've got to stop coming up with these diversionary problems that waste our time.
Yeah. Shelby, Marvin asked a question about the iconoclasm that we've seen recently. He says, across the nation and the globe, communities are reassessing historical figures such as Presidents Wilson and Jefferson. And we are seeing sports teams being renamed, for instance. Where do we draw the line? And are these gestures purely symbolic, or are these positive steps towards tangible progress? Do we need to revise our history entirely in that case?
The reason that these things are happening is because minorities know and believe and have been conditioned to see themselves as victims. And so when they want they relate to the larger society as victims, and they're sort of keeping the pot boiling. Well, I'll spend time and make sure the NFL that they all kneel, or I mean, these sorts of symbolic things that mean really nothing. But again, give young people the illusion that they're really doing something. My feeling is, again, that the real problem here is the deepest problem here is the fact that white Americans have lost their moral confidence and will not stand up for obvious, common sense things. Obviously, kneeling or not kneeling at an NFL football game is not relevant to much of anything, let alone the sort of problems that exist in the Black community today.
Yeah.
But yet the owners will kowtow to these silly demands, and will make heroes out of these fighting the sort of what I call nothing warfare. Warfare over absolutely nothing of any significance. And the problems go on. The marriage rates stay terrible. The children are born out of wedlock. Schools are in complete collapse at this point. Public housing is pathetic, is a hotbed of crime. We go on all day, the problems here that again, there is nothing to be gained from any of these little silly debates except the knowledge that they're silly. Don't make silly something else. This is silly. Now, once we can accept that, we can again move closer to what the real problems might be and actually make some sort of progress. But we need a society with the moral confidence to say, this is silly. Okay, you don't like silly? It's stupid. It really is. There's no way. We can talk all day long. There's no way to make this meaningful. And yet the left and minorities have done a great job of preoccupying, and media picks it up, runs these little silly stories about these little silly events that have no relationship to anybody or to anything.
Yeah. I think I know the answer to this question. Shelby, do you feel the same way about reparations, which have been called for, and there are several plans to put that in the works?
Yeah. Well, again, we'll fight and argue over reparations because we don't want to deal with the real problems. Is a reparations going to mean that 4th-year-old Black kid is going to be able to read? You can't read by the 4th grade. The odds are pretty much against you. Is he going to be? Is going to have an impact on that? I mean, all the questions are obvious. Do whites today owe me something because of what whites in the past did? Do I owe them something? I mean, we can't make history. We can't wipe away history. You can have all the reparations you want. History will still be sitting there looking at you. Yeah. So it's silly. I always say that if they have reparations, I won't take any. My grandfather was born a slave. I'm the grandson, literally, of a slave. I will not take any reparations. I like money as well as the next person, but I won't take any. You can't buy innocence, and I can't sell innocence. We have to live today in today's world and stand up to it. That's difficult enough.
Yeah. Lawrence asks, he's interested in your opinion about the Black Lives Matter manifesto, or just the ideals that underlie that political movement.
Again, I think it's a movement that mimics, that has no authentic mission in today's world, and therefore mimics an earlier era in the 60s, which was full of great turmoil and so forth. But the issues were, in fact, women did need a movement to move ahead. Blacks certainly did need one. The Vietnam War did not pan out. It was a travesty in many ways. Mm-hmm. These were real movements. Mm-hmm. Today, that's it's not there. And so I look at Black Lives Matter, and you just sort of feel for them, because they want so badly to have the glamour of protest, so badly to be seen in the way that blacks were seen in the days of the Black Panthers with their big with weapons and all. They want that vision of black militancy. Mm-hmm. They think that is where the real action is. And of course, it's a diversion. To go down that road is to be lost. And I hate to see our Black youth be lost. Mm-hmm. You got a real difficult job here to make a life. You don't have time for this.
Yeah. Shelby, I mean, I guess the alternative to the white guilt payoff symbiosis that goes on now is a conservative notion that weighs individual responsibility and individualism. Do you see that latter prescription getting hold in the African-American community, or getting a toehold in the American political movement that is trying to address race problems in America?
I'm not sure I understand the first part.
Well, so just your ideas would be considered to be, you for the longest time have been a voice in the wilderness about what the true problem is for African Americans and the way they're ameliorated. Do you see growth in the ranks of people like you who see an entirely different way to solve these problems?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is a Black conservative movement. And one of the things that interests me about it is that it is basically at this point, it's the young who I think recognize the fact that America, I think they're recognizing the fact that there is real possibility and opportunity in American life today if you're Black. It's not like when I came along, where it was very rare for a Black to go to college. Today, it's not noticeable. And so I think that, again, things have changed, and I think it's the opportunities are so prolific in American life today that alone brings many Blacks into the conservative fold, because they want to be successful. They're really Americans. Since we forget this when we focus so much on race. They're Americans. Mm-hmm. They want the same values all Americans want. They want to do well in life, and they want an America that's open to them. And boy, is it! It's wide open. To them. So that the real problem we have is, what do you do when you win?
Yeah.
We've won.
Bert asked the following question. He says, and this has to do with policy and politics. He says, African-American voters vote overwhelmingly Democrat. What advice would you give the Republican Party to attract African-American voters?
That's a very, very good question, and I have thought about that, continue to think about that a lot. I think conservatism, Republicans, so forth, have not, for the most part, done a good job of speaking. I think that the truth about politics and life, for that matter, is that what people want when you're asking for their vote or you're asking for something is they want witness. Do you know who I really am? Do you know what my background, what my family, my group has suffered? To me, one of the great things that why Republicans have an advantage here is because they can because America has moved so far, and Black Americans have come so far, and it's not difficult at this point to acknowledge what their suffering was. Don't take suffering away from a group that suffered for 4 centuries. Acknowledge it. Honor the talent for survival that Blacks have shown. What other group in human history have survived what we've been through?
Mm-hmm.
Look at it that way. That's where a Republican can start, speaking to minorities from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've given witness, you've flattered, you've acknowledged, you've shown that you understand who they are, they had more suffering than anybody else.
Hmm.
And they were put through as Americans, put through a test that nobody else was put through.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, they have earned a kind of greatness. And you lead as a Republican, speaking somewhere in a Black community with that idea of greatness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking to great people.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to just a bunch of crybaby losers. I'm talking to people who have truly achieved in this world greatness, transformed the moral character of Western civilization,
Mm-hmm.
have taken the idea of freedom past the idea of race. Black Americans. Well, now I'm ready to hear you.
Yeah. Shelby, I know that you interact some with Senator Scott. He seems to be a very new and powerful voice for these issues in America now. What are your impressions about him, and could he rise up and provide the kind of moral leadership that you think is necessary to address the true problems in the African American community?
Oh yes, I think Senator Scott has the juice, as they say. He's the right man at the right time and has already articulated many of these things. This again, a focus on the individual and the array of possibilities and opportunities available to Blacks today, and once has found ways to have the government be supportive of that without taking it over, without saying that taking over the mission of Blacks to overcome their oppression. He's wonderful, but again, he should not be related to as a novelty. Oh, a Black conservative, the novelty. We dismiss novelties. He's not a novelty. He's an American voice, and he has to be seen that way. And he's done a wonderful job of carrying himself that way, so that whites can be honored by him, in association with him, as Americans. The focus on the American is everything. So I hope that he begins to demarcate this territory that he represents so well. I'm a big fan.
Well, let me ask you more generally about the political parties in our country. What do you think about the way that Democrats and Republicans are handling the issues of discussions around racial relations in America?
Well, not very well. When you look at what the real problems are, it's painful. No one. We are so afraid of each other. We're so afraid of stigmatizing each other that we sort of have an unspoken agreement never to tell the truth.
I have a couple, let me ask a couple questions from the audience, and these are kind of orthogonal to what we're talking about. The 1619 Project. Robert asks, what do you think about the 1619 Project? And to the extent you think anything about it, Shelby, tell us what it is. And Tricia asks, how can the 1619 Project, which is now being injected forcibly into public school curricula, be countered? What is the project, and do you have an opinion about it, Shelby?
It's a project that started by the New York Times this past year, which attempts to sort of rewrite the curriculum for public schools, basing American history in 1619, saying when the first slaves came over that was the moment of birth, that America was born in slavery and has been committed to the subjugation of and victimization of blacks and minorities ever since. And the idea is to revise our teaching of American history so that it conforms to this notion of white oppression and black victimization. And so it's clearly a nakedly politicized version of American history that the left is espousing in the interest of expanding. The whole left in America is expanding the power to be taken from victimization. Everybody's a victim in the left vision of things. And therefore power is due the government to take over those problems and straighten them all out. So it's just an old trick that the left uses, exploits blacks. Blacks are always exploited as the ultimate victims. And so we start with slavery, and again, blacks are the justify transforming the American curriculum in this particular way. So it's a power move, period, just pure and simple. It's been disputed countless times. The Woodson Center in Washington, D.C. has taken on the sort of the formal combating this whole notion. They have what's called the 1776 agenda, which is again designed to reverse 1619. But it's again a corruption. It's not accurate. It's false history. There were obviously blacks were victimized in America, but the picture's a lot more compromised than that. It was America also that constantly, from its very beginnings, resisted slavery. It was America that a lot of the thinking and the ideas that ultimately ended slavery were created and put into play. No society has fought racism more thoroughly, more relentlessly than America. That might be a good way to set up your curriculum on American history, but I'm not waiting on that.
Shelby, let's just end by having you comment on what role our political leaders could play in advancing discussions about race relations. So if you could write a speech for President Trump or one for Joe Biden should he become president, or maybe even ex-President Obama, what would you like him to say that you think could advance the dialogue and help us make progress with these problems?
I would, I think we got in the 60s, we got into the habit of seeing all our social problems as problems of identity and groups. I think it's time for presidents to move away from that and move toward the idea of the individual and individual freedom and individual responsibility, which is real power. Individuals can activate things. They make things happen. They turn the world. Groups are always after the fact of the individual. They're the result of it. But it's the individuals who are out there today, right now, finding themselves, developing, evolving, making contributions to life and so forth, who are giving us tomorrow. Well, we need a focus on individuals and citizens Citizenship is a wonderful idea because it acknowledges both at the same time. Fealty to one's government, one's state, but also to oneself. And so citizenship comes with responsibilities. And it has its rewards, but it has its responsibilities. Identity doesn't come up with anything, but citizenship does. So again, it's just as a quick answer to that question, I would definitely hope for. Obama had that chance, but he stayed in the collective realm. I think Trump has not known what to do for the most part, but certainly could if he chose and made up his mind. And you know that the individual is what he is. He is himself an individualist, if there ever was one. And we need individualism, and our mutual support comes out of that.
Great. Shelby, we reached the end of our time. Thanks so much for this important discussion.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Our next Hoover virtual policy briefing will be Tuesday, July 14th at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern Time with Bjorn Lomborg for a discussion on his latest book entitled False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. In fact, the book will be released next Tuesday, so we are fortunate to be among the first to talk to him about it. Named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, Bjorn is a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution and president of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. The New York Times best-selling skeptical environmentalist argues that panic over climate change is causing more harm than good. We also have a series called Hoover Capital Conversations that brings together Hoover Fellows and policymakers for informed discussions between those who generate ideas and those who turn them into actionable policy. Our next conversation is with Senator Marco Rubio and Hoover's own Lanhee Chen on July 22nd at 1:30 p.m. Pacific and 4:30 Eastern Time. You can sign up at hoover.org/capital conversations to sign in to that briefing. Again, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you again for your support, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.